what is racism? How much of it is in our world today? If we were thinking about this activity of Hitler spotting, how and trying to steelman the case of, if not critical race theory, but people who look for racism in our world, how much would you say?
Well, it's a good thing to try to define. I would say that racism is the belief that other people are inferior to you. You could see a form of it where you thought people were superior to you. That could also happen, but more commonly it's you see a group of people as being inferior to you simply by dint of the fact that they have a different racial background. And that's sort of the easiest way to define racism. As I say, I mean, there are types of racism, I mean, mainly anti-Semitism, actually. Perhaps it's the only one, which weirdly relies on a hatred of people who a certain type of person thinks are better than them. And that's a particular peculiarity, one of the peculiarities of anti-Semitism.
Well, anti-Semitism somehow does both, right?
Yes. Well, one of the eternal fascinating things about anti-Semitism is it does everything at the same time.
It's like a quantum racism.
Yes.
They're both superior and inferior.
You know that, do you know Vasily Grossman's Life and Fate? So in the middle of Life and Fate, which a Persian friend of mine always said was one of only two great novels of the 20th century. She was a very harsh literary critic.
What was the other one?
Oh, The Leopard, obviously.
The Leopard?
The Leopard of Giuseppe de Lampedusa. Yeah.
Okay.
She's definitely right on that one. Life and Fate is I'm
learning so much today. Yes.
Life and Fate is an extraordinary book, mainly about. We know Grossman was obviously Jewish himself, but he saw almost everything that he could have done in the Second World War. He saw Stalingrad, and he was a journalist, and he wrote first-hand accounts of Stalingrad. He was also the first journalist into Treblinka, and his account, which you can read in one of the collections of his journalism, his account of walking into Treblinka is just one of the most devastating, haunting pieces of journalism or prose you can read. Anyhow, I mentioned him because Grossman in the middle of Life and Fate, which is about a sort of 900-page novel, in the middle of it, which is about the dark axis around Stalingrad, where at one point he amazingly sort of goes into the minds of both Hitler and Stalin. He says Stalin in his study feels his counterpart in Berlin, and he says he feels very close to him at this moment.
Wow. Yeah. Around Stalingrad, like leading up to the battle.
After Stalingrad, when the Germans had lost, he says he feels the closeness of Hitler. But Grossman, in the middle of Life and Fate, slap bang at the worst hours of the 20th century, suddenly dedicates a chapter to anti-Semitism. And I've seen anti-Semitism as something I've always been very interested in, because I've always had an instinctive utter revulsion of it. And also partly because of having seen bits of it in the Middle East and elsewhere. But I mention this because Grossman, in the middle of Life and Fate, takes time out and does this like 3-page explanation, or 3-page description of anti-Semitism, and it's extraordinary. I mean, it's the only thing I can think of that's equally good is Gregor von Retzory, who wrote a luridly titled but brilliant set of novellas called The Confessions of an Anti-Semite, and about pre-First World War anti-Semitism in Eastern and Central Europe. Anyway, Grossman says in the middle of Life and Fate that one of the extraordinary things about anti-Semitism is that it does everything at the same time. That the Jews get condemned in one place for being rich and in another for being poor. Condemned in one place for assimilating and in another for not assimilating. For assimilating too much and assimilating too little. For being too successful, for not being successful enough. So I think it's the only racism that includes within it a detestation, for the real anti-Semite, a detestation of people that the person may perceive to be better than them, correctly or otherwise.
By the way, I'm embarrassed to say I have not read this one of two greatest novels of the 20th century, Life and Fate, Жизнь и судьба. And just to read off of Wikipedia, Vasily Grossman, a Ukrainian Jew, became a correspondent for the Soviet military paper Krasnaya Zvezda. Having volunteered and been rejected for military service, he spent 1,000 days in the front lines, roughly 3 of the 4 years of the conflict between the Germans and the Soviets. And the main themes covered in how's it go? Life and Fate. I keep thinking Жизнь и судьба is a theme on Jewish identity and the Holocaust, Grossman's idea of humanity and the human goodness, Stalin's distortion of reality and values, and science, life goes on, and reality of war. It's interesting. I need to definitely
read it. I think you'll really get a lot from it. It's one of the other things. Sorry, on reference, but one of the other things he does is that he has this extraordinary ability to talk about the absolute highest levels of the conflict and then zoom in. It's rather like the camera work they use in things like Lord of the Rings, where he zooms down, then gets one person in the midst of all this, and you get on that.
Or puts you in the study too. So I personally have read and reread the William Shire's The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, who's another journalist who was there. But he does not do it. Interestingly enough, given such a large novel, kind of the definitive work on the definitive original work that goes to source materials on Hitler, he doesn't touch anti-Semitism really.
So, big thing to miss out.
Well, he just says it very calmly and objectively, as he does for most of the work, that this was the fact of life. There's a lot of cruelty throughout, but he doesn't get to...
Well, one of the things is, of course, they lost the war because of anti-Semitism. I mean, that's one kind of important way to view it. This, how Andrew Roberts and other historians say it, is that, in the end, the Nazis lost the war because they were Nazis. It sounds almost too neat, but it's worth remembering that, at the end of the war, when the Germans need to be transporting troops and they need to be transporting very basic supplies, Eichmann makes sure he gets the trains to transport the Jews right up to the end.
Well, that's certainly a dark possibility.
But anyhow, but to go back to racism in general,
yes.
Racism in general, apart from anti-Semitism, relies on the perception that another group of people, a racial group other than your own, are inferior to you. That's what I'd say is the easiest shorthand of racism. And of course, it's one of the stupidest things that our species is capable of. I mean, one of the stupidest, that you can look at a person and guess them in their entirety, in fact, because of their skin color. I mean, it's like, what a stupid idea that is, as well as being an evil one. But the I would say that I think it's a dangerous thing in our era that there are bits of it coming back. That's why I say we do need we need our antennae working. We just don't need them to be overactive or underactive.